The file begins. The year 2026 brought a new kind of magic to the world stage, one far removed from the grand illusions of the MGM Grand. It was the magic of revelation, a slow, agonizing pause, anatomy of a fall. David Copperfield, the name synonymous with spectacle and the impossible, found himself entangled in a narrative far more sinister than any vanishing act. His image, once gilded with the sheen of pure entertainment, now began to corrode under the harsh light of the recently unsealed Epstein files. The initial leak was a whisper, then a roar. A casual mention, buried deep within a trove of court documents, connected the master illusionist to the orbit of Jeffrey Epstein. This was not a trick. This was a sentence. The public, long accustomed to seeing Copperfield defy gravity and logic, now grappled with the grim reality of his name alongside those who trafficked in despair. The gap between his carefully constructed persona and the emerging allegations was a chasm. It was a digital grave being dug, one line of redacted text at a time. The true scale of this inventory of sins, however, was yet to fully emerge. But the initial shockwave was enough to fracture the concrete foundation of his legacy. The media, sensing blood, descended. The initial whisper became a deafening cacophony. Every news outlet, every digital platform dissected the fragments of information. The public outcry was immediate, visceral. The illusion of innocence shattered. This was the meat grinder of fame at its most brutal. FBI memos, once locked away, now painted a chilling picture. Witness testimonies, raw and explicit, spoke of parties. Not the kind with doves and vanishing acts, but gatherings on Epstein's private island, Little St. James. Copperfield's name, once a beacon, now appeared in conjunction with these horrific details. It was a brand of magic no one wanted to witness. His legal team moved swiftly, issuing statements of vehement denial. They called the allegations baseless, a desperate attempt to smear a public figure, a predictable defense. But the documents persisted, the names, the dates, the locations. They were not figments of imagination, they were concrete. The cold, hard evidence suggested an pause inventory of sins far deeper than any initial leak implied. The full extent of this entanglement and the irreversible damage it inflicted was only beginning to manifest. Further revelations promised to bury the truth under an avalanche of shame. The full extent of this entanglement and the irreversible damage it inflicted was only beginning to manifest. Further revelations promised to bury the truth under an avalanche of shame. Yet, before the mud, there was gold. A young David Seth Kotkin, born in Metuchen, New Jersey, understood the alchemy of attention. He learned early that the greatest trick was not making things disappear, but making people believe. From teenage prodigy to Broadway star, his trajectory was steep. Television became his canvas. He made the Statue of Liberty vanish. He walked through the Great Wall of China. Millions watched, their mouths agape. It was an era of pure spectacle, of family wonder. He sold innocence, wrapped in a tuxedo with a charming smile. This was the pause anatomy of a fall, not yet visible, but already sketched in the blueprints of ambition. The boy who loved magic built an empire on illusion, a shimmering facade that would one day crack under the weight of its own carefully constructed mythology. He was a master of misdirection, and the world was his audience. The facade once built on wonder soon solidified into something far more tangible. The illusionist became an industrialist. His name, David Copperfield, was not merely a marquee, it was a brand, a corporation. The wealth accumulated was not just paper, but concrete steel and offshore accounts. He acquired Mosaic, a collection of 11 private islands in the Exumas. A personal pause digital grave of isolation, a fortress against the mundane, a kingdom where rules bent to his will. This was not merely luxury, it was control. Every detail from the thread count of the sheets to the flight paths of private jets was meticulously managed. His empire expanded beyond performances into museums, real estate, a sprawling network of influence. The man who once made monuments disappear now owned them, a collector of assets as much as illusions. This unchecked power, this self-made sovereignty, created a vacuum, a place where the whispers of the outside world faded, a place where certain associations, once unthinkable for the purveyor of innocent magic, could take root. The pause shadow bunker of his success was now complete, impenetrable, and deeply unsettling. Precisely in this hermetic pause silence, where the sound of money drowned out the cries of conscience, those very certain connections began to sprout. Not mere rumors, these were pause fragments of an empire, broken off from the main mass and settled in the shadows. Documents, photographs, testimonies, seeping through pause concrete walls of silence. On the map of the world, there is a point they called the Island of Pedophiles. Little St. James, not just a resort. It was a pause laboratory of darkness, the name of a magician whose hands could make anything disappear, from the Statue of Liberty to the moon, surfaced in connection with this archipelago of vice. Not direct pause accusations, rather shadows on the periphery of testimony, unanswered questions. Former employees, their faces hidden by the darkness of court orders, whispered of guests, of schedules, of specific pause entertainments, which required not only money, but also a certain level of pause silence. This was an inventory of sins, where every line was written in pause blood and fear. Was he there? Did he enter the circle of the pause chosen? Or was he just one of those who, through ignorance or convenience, crossed the orbit of this black star? The question is not whether he committed crimes. The question is about pause complicity, about the unwillingness to see, about the price of pause silence, which he perhaps paid so that his own empire would continue to shine. Pause. A bitter testament to this era. The empire of silence, built on illusions and capital, could not fully ignore pause the echo of this darkness. Official documents, interrogation protocols, passenger manifests of private pause jets. The name Copperfield, like many others, ran through these paper mazes. But not as pause and accused. Rather, as a mention, as a shadow, slipping along the walls, pause of the interrogation room. The inevitability of collapse hung in the air. Grand juries, federal agents, civil, pause lawsuits. Every stone was overturned in search of gold or dirt. However, in the case of the magician, the investigation always ran into pause, an impenetrable wall. Lack of direct evidence, lack of witnesses willing to speak under oath, pause specifically about him and his actions on the island. This was the anatomy of a fall, where the main virus remained pause invisible. Lawyers whose fees could buy a small country worked pause tirelessly, not to defend against accusations, but to pause prevent them from arising. Narrative control, leak management, pause, oblivion. This was not a battle in court, but but a Pause war for reputation waged in the shadows. The meat grinder of fame worked mercilessly, but not for Pause him. Time is the best Pause executioner of truth. Years erase details. Memories blur. Evidence disappears. The mangled fate of victims, their words, often drowned in Pause's bureaucratic swamp and skepticism. And when it comes to a man whose profession is misdirection, distinguishing truth from Pause's sleight of hand becomes practically impossible. Pause. The digital coffin for these secrets is not yet closed. The digital coffin for these secrets is not yet closed. Inventory of sins, as it turns out, leads not only to the future, but also to the past. Long before the name Epstein became synonymous with a dark abyss, shadows, Pause of rumors already swirled around the Illusionist. Unproven accusations, stories that dissolved in the air like smoke from a trick. They were too ephemeral for a trial, too convenient for oblivion. But the archive of memory holds everything. Every legend has its cracks. His success seemed to smell of fresh printer's ink and the old fear of poverty. But beneath that gilding, one always felt the concrete coldness of calculation. There were whispers about methods, about the boundaries of what was allowed, about how easily the great deceiver could cross the line, Pause of morality if it served art or himself. These episodes, previously dismissed as the costs of fame or the envy, Pause of competitors, now take on a new, sinister hue. They became part of the anatomy of the fall. Not isolated incidents, but links in one chain. Every time truth slipped away and accusations crumbled, it only strengthened his myth and made him more vulnerable to Pause the next blow. It wasn't just magic. It was a system of truth suppression. His shadow was always longer than he was. And now it turned out to be Pause, blacker. His name, once shining like a spotlight on a stage, now bore an indelible stain. There were no canceled shows, no torn contracts blazoned in headlines. But there was a different, deeper damage. Reputation is a fragile crystal glass. It can be glued, but the cracks, Pause, will remain forever. The public, who had believed in his miracles for decades, now looked at him through a prism of doubt. Every wave of his hand, every disappearing object, every smile on stage, all filtered through memories of Pause's dark headlines. The image of the immaculate magician, built over years of meticulous work and mystification, was a mutilated destiny. He did not collapse overnight, but his brilliance dimmed. From gold, pure as a tear, he turned into gilt, beneath which shows, through Pause, cheap metal. The meat grinder of fame, it seemed, had bypassed him, but only for a time. It did not destroy his career, but it ripped from his legacy something more precious. Pause. Unconditional trust. This was not a court verdict. It was in post-mortem audit of his moral capital. Unconditional trust. This was not a court verdict. It was a post-mortem audit of his moral capital. The true cost, however, was not measured in box office receipts. It was etched deeper into the very fabric of his craft. The illusionist, who once commanded belief with a flick of his wrist, found his greatest trick had failed. The seamless blend of reality and fantasy, his signature was now Pause, irrevocably fractured. The public, once eager conspirators in his magic, now saw him through a lens of stark, unforgiving reality. The glamour, once so thick it could be cut with a knife, thinned to reveal the concrete beneath. His association, a shadow that stretched across oceans and years, became an inventory of sins, not his own, yet undeniably attached. This was the anatomy of a fall, not from grace in the traditional sense, but from a pedestal of pure, unadulterated wonder. The ethical implications were a slow-acting poison. They corroded the very foundation of his appeal. Could one still believe in the man who promised to make the moon vanish, when the darkness he touched was so painfully real? The magic, once a shield against the mundane, offered no protection from the harsh light of scrutiny. It was a cruel irony. A master of escape, trapped in a narrative not of his own making. The stage lights, once illuminating his genius, now cast long, accusatory shadows. The whispers began, not of how he did it, but of who he knew. The gilded cage of celebrity, it turned out, had bars of solid steel. This was the painful emergence of a truth more brutal than any trick. Painful emergence of a truth more brutal than any trick. So, what remains? The legacy of David Copperfield, once an unblemished monument to imagination, is now a complex, contradictory text. A digital coffin holding both the brilliance of his illusions and the indelible stain of his choices. There is no easy path to redemption for an association that leaves such deep moral scars. The world, eager for heroes, is quicker to condemn than to forgive when the hero's halo dims. His name, forever linked to the spectacular and the sinister, became a bitter testament to the fragility of reputation. The grandeur of his illusions, once limitless, now feels confined, almost claustrophobic. He continues to perform, a testament to endurance perhaps. But the unspoken question hangs in the air, thick as cigar smoke in a back room. Can true magic exist where trust has been so profoundly compromised? The master of illusion, who built empires on belief, found himself caught in a very real, very dark world, where the stakes were not applause, but human dignity. His story is a bitter testament to the fact that even the most powerful magic cannot erase the consequences of proximity to evil. The moon perhaps will never truly vanish, but a part of the illusionist soul, that pure, untainted wonder, already has. This is the final act, not of magic, but of profound melancholic truth.